Ois Dalet. Ois Dalet. V'tzorich lohavin. So we need to understand. So the Rebbe explained that sometimes, most of the time, Talmud comes before Maisa. Talmud Godel. Shemevil in Maisa, but Talmud is Godel. But as a hachone to Matan Torah, and as a hachone to Chanukas HaMizbeach, over there, Maisa comes before Talmud. Rabbi explained that's why it was necessary, Nase v'nishma, Nase koidem l'nishma, as a preparation for Matan Torah. But there we needed Maisa first. And the same thing is with regards to Chanukas HaMizbeach, in which Yehuda, which represents Bittel, and Maisa comes before Yisachar, which represents the inyan of Torah. Over there, we need the Maisa before Torah. But the Rebbe's question is going to be now, how come? Why is it that before Matan Torah, there needs to be the level of Maisa first? Before Chanukah Sameach is Maisa. And in generally, Talmud comes first. The Rebbe will explain that before Matan Torah, before the Chanukah HaMizbeach, there needed to be the Gilu HaAtzmus. And that is a deeper within Maisa itself. The Rebbe is going to explain there is Maisa, which is the last koyach of the person, the end of the person, the soifon of the person, which is connected and megala, the higher level than the koiches pnimiyim. So there is a connection to the level of giluyim of the nefesh. So that's one level of Maisa. There is also a level of Maisa which is outside of the person, which the recipient get. That is connected not only to the higher in the nefesh, in the highest giluyim, but that's connected to the atzmus hanefesh. And that means that when we're mamshich atzmus, then the Maisa is even on a higher level. When we're mamshich giluyim, so the maila of Maisa consists of, because there's giluyim there. But when we're mamshich atzmus, which was necessary for Chanukas HaMizbeach and the Matan Torah. I know there's a lot of words here, but we'll see it all in the Maimer now. Let's look inside. Dalet. Betzorich lohavin. So we need to understand the kiv on shegam ze shetalmud godel hu mipnei shemevi lemaisa. Why is Talmud greater? Because it brings the person to Maisa. So that makes the greatness of Talmud, because Talmud brings to Maisa, Maisa hu ha'ikar. So how come ma'u achilik bein shnei ha'inyonim? So what's the difference between these two ideas of sometimes Talmud coming first and sometimes Maisa coming first? So b'derech klal we say ha-Talmud hu koydem l'Maisa, that we say that Talmud comes before Maisa, which is koydem bizman. First, we say that Talmud comes first. In time, it comes first, because first you have to learn before you know what to do. So time-wise, it's koydem, it comes before. But v'gam koydem b'mayla, and it's also, study is also a higher, it comes first in its level, in advantage. Talmud God, we say Talmud is great. But, so that is general, that's b'derech klal. But by Matan Torah, when they dedicated the Mishkan, over there, Maisa came first. Over there was Nase v'nishma, and Yehuda comes before Yisachar. So the point of the explanation, we have to understand, first of all, why Maisa is the Iker, And then we will see that there's actually two levels in Maisa. And then we will see that sometimes one level in Maisa is Taka comes before Talmud, and one level in Maisa comes after Talmud. One level in Maisa is the connection of Maisa with Atzmus. Then Maisa is higher. One level of Maisa is because it's connected with the Bligvul of the Nefesh. So then the Talmud comes first because it's the idea is that the Bligvul is Misgale in Maisa. So the Maila is the Bligvul. Let's look inside. So the Kudus Habiru, the Zesha Maisa Iker. So why is the Maisa the main? Af Shemaisa hu koyach hayeser acharen. Even though Maisa is the very last koyach. So why is Maisa the main? It's the last power in the person, in the nefesh. The person has an intellect, he has emotions, he has rotzen, he has a big structure there, but the last power is action. And similar to this, above, the action is the end of Ishtalshalus. So why is Maisa the main if it's the last? Now the Rebbe will bring two sayings. There's one expression which we say, no, it's tchilosum b'soifam b'tchilosum. That the soifam means the Maisa, so that there is a connection between Maisa with the beginning. And another expression in which we say, soif Maisa b'machshava tchila, which has even a higher source, as we will see. So Rebbe explains, who kinotes tchilosum b'soifam b'tchilosum. One point is because the beginning is stuck in the end, so it's connected to the end. And the end, the soifon, is connected to the beginning, to the tchilosum. Rebbe will explain in a minute. V'gama, there's an additional connection, ki soif Maisa b'machshava techila. That the end of Maisa is first in the machshava. So first the Rebbe will explain from Ayin Beis, from the Rebbe Rashab, the idea of no tsoifim b'tchilosum, tchilosum b'soifim. V'vayir ad mur Rashab nishmos eidin b'hemshech tofa. That above in the hemshech of Ayin Beis, that achiluk the shnei hoinyonim, the difference between these two ideas. First, that we said here, no tchilosum b'soifim b'tchilosum. So he says the soifon, when we talk about the end of what? So when there is an extension that extends and comes down, so the end is the complete and the finish of that hamshocha is the soifon. And this end is ne'utzo b'tchiloson. This is stuck in and it's connected to the beginning, which is Tchilas Bereshis Hamshocha, the beginning and the start of the Hamshocha, the beginning of the start of the Hamshocha and the end of the Hamshocha. So brings there down a moshul to this Hamshocha. We're talking about the beginning of the Hamshocha, the end of the Hamshocha. What does that really mean? Because there's a whole process from the process in which the person is moved to the Tchilas Hamshocha to give, in the case of tzedakah, and then until it comes to the actual giving. As brought down over there in 9 Beis, example. Mashpos tzedakah from giving the flow of charity to the poor person. So there is a process of tchila and soif. Shahatchila shel ha'hashpahu. The beginning of that flow is shemis oirer berachamim al ha'oni. That the person is aroused with compassion on the poor person. So that's the opening. How does it start, the whole process? He has compassion. He sees the poor person, so there is in his heart, it becomes a arousal, an awakening of compassion on the poor person. And from this becomes by him later on a rotzin, a desire to do good to the poor person. So now he has a rotzin from that he wants to do now. The compassion become the reason why he wants to help the poor person. He wants to help the poor person because he has compassion. And then that will to help the person comes down into his intellect, how to help him into his emotions, how to give and to develop until it comes into actual action. That's the end in which he gives the tzedakah to the oni. So the beginning, again, we have the tchila is the arousal of that compassion. The end, the soif, is the actual giving to the poor person. And it goes through the whole levels in between. So what does it mean? Ve'inyan notes soifon b'tchilasonu. What does it mean that the end is stuck into the beginning? Which means that she'ikir hamekuvon b'yisoirer sarachamim tchilason. What is the main intent in which he had the arousal of compassion? That there should be a flow in actuality in the end. So that means that the end, what happens, the Maisa, the tzedakah that he gives is stuck in the beginning, because the beginning, the compassion was to give. So what you're doing now is the outcome, is the techila of that compassion is knows the end, what happens in the techila. If there will not be the actual flow, the actual tzedakah in actuality, hagam shal yidei harachamim naseh ha'his oiderus the kol koichas hanaylim shaboy. Although through the compassion there became an arousal of all of his great powers, the rotzin and the seichel and the midos, everything he wants to help, but if he doesn't actually help, rotzin, seichel, midos, and even if it came to the level of speech that he just spoke nicely, even if his desire to do good to the poor person, mizgala b'dibur, comes revealed in his speech, he speaks words of comfort to the poor person. So he's even bringing it down, not to the level of Maisa, but until the level of Dibur, which is one step above the lowest of the level. It's not the Soifon, but it's a level of Dibur. But it didn't come in actuality. It's the main thing is lacking. So the end is stuck in the beginning, because that's what the beginning is all about, is to come to the end. Since we're saying that the whole beginning is because of the end, because the end is stuck in the beginning, that it's all because of the beginning, that that the intent which is stuck, what is the intent in that to begin with, in the tchila, what is done is stuck in there, is the soifon is knows with chiloson, is that there needs to be an action in actuality, which is the end. That's the note soifon with chiloson. Lachain, we come to the other way around. It's also notes chiloson b'soifon. So the beginning is also connected to the soifon. Shegilui hakoyach the b'chinas tchila. That where is the revelation of the power of the techila? Hudavke b'soifa hashpa. So notes that when the tchila is stuck in the end, meaning that when it does come out in the end, then we see already what the tchila was okay. Shegilu hakoyach the b'chinas tchila, the beginning of the koyach of level tchila who dafke b'soifa hashpah is dafka the end of the hashpah by ma'aser poil in the ma'aser poil. So those are the two things, and they're connected because the purpose of the hashpah is the ma'aser. And therefore, when can you see that the hashpah is properly when it comes out with the ma'aser? That's one inyan. But then we have another inyan, the inyan soif ma'aser b'machshava tchila. When we say the end of action is machshava tchila, is in the beginning of the machshava, meaning that it's even before the actual isoidus rachmim. In the tchilas hamachshava, that's a higher level. The inyan soif ma'aser machshava tchila. Notes this is on a higher level than the end in the beginning, in the end. We're talking about even before the beginning. And we're also talking about more than just the end of his action. We're talking about the end, how it's being received by the Oni. The Inyan, so the Peter say Maise, the Peter Seif Maise, who, what does it mean? Seif Maise b'machshava tchila. Who loy Seif Asiya Atzma. We're not talking about the end of the Asiya itself, the end like by the Seifon Asiya Sa'odom. We're talking about the person. Hello, but we're talking about Hamaise Haba. The act which comes through the act of the doing of the person. The Rebbe introduces now a newer level in the level of Maisa. It's not the Maisa that the person does, the end of his act, which we were told that's a note, but it's the act that has been accomplished after what the person has done. It gives the example, the Bahashpoah Chesed, when we talk about when the flow and what you're giving is kindness, Inyan Soif Maisa, what would be there the end of the Maisa? Soif Maisa, the end of the result of the Maisa would be Hu Kabbalas HaHashpoah. That would be the receiving of the Hashpoah. The Soifon is the giving that the person gives. But the Soif Maisa, the end of the action, is what the recipient of Kabbalas Hashpoah. Sha'oni Mekabalas Hashpoah B'toiv V'nenem that the poor person receives that flow in good and enjoys it. That's the end of the action. The end of the action is the results, the accomplishment that the poor person enjoys and receives the flow. That's the soif ma'isa after the ma'isa. The inyan zeh, that part, this idea, in what way the poor person gets the hashpoah, that is not up to the noisan. You finish when you gave it, that's the end of it. That's already outside of you. It's the recipient. You gave it to him, but how he takes it and how he accepts it, that's not anywhere. So in other words, it's outside of you. That's an action which is beyond. It's a consequent result of what you did, but that's the action that happens and not anymore that you're doing. That level of what happens, magia b'machshava tchila. This becomes to in the beginning of thought, in the machshava. Hainu b'hatchila shelifnei tchilas hamachshava. That's the beginning. That before the tchilas hamachshava was this oidurus to do good. This is in the level which is before the beginning of machshava. Lemaila mishodesh hashpoah. This is higher than the root from where the flow comes from, that the source. source is that you want to do good. You were aroused. You have compassion. This is tchilas hamachshava, before hashpa. The shoyresh hashpa, the root of the flow, that arousal to do good, hu tchilas hamachshava. That's the beginning of the machshava. We're talking about the part that comes before tchilas hamachshava. That's the Seif Maisa. But the beginning of the machshava, not lifnei, that comes before. The beginning of machshava, hu tchilas hamachshava. Begilu inyan zed tchilas hamachshava hu b'seif hashpa. That comes in the end of the actual flow, in the mice of the person. No, it's tchilasam b'seifam. As we said before, the beginning is tied in the end. But the hamaila, the seif maisa, but the maila, the advantage of the end of the maisa, which is the kabbalas hashpa, how the flow was received, he should seif maisa. But when we're talking about that level of maisa, the result, magia ba'atchila shelifnei tchilas hamachshava, that comes to the beginning, which precedes the tchilas hamachshava, which is higher than the yisoyrus lahetiv in a higher source. Lemaila masheresh hashpa. And therefore, it says, L'chein hatainuk sheyesh lamashpia makabolos hashpa. So that's why the delight that the mashpia gets from receiving that from mekabolos hashpa, from the fact that the poor person received the hashpa, well, mizesha only kibel hashpa b'toiv, that the fact that the poor person did receive it well, the hashpa that he gave him, that is a greater level of delight, even more than the delight in the hashpa itself. The hashpa itself is a hashpa. There is a delight when it comes to the actual giving, but the receiving by the oni, the delight that the mashpia has through receiving well, is on a higher level, is greater to the mashpia. He gives him. So now he says, just like we're talking about hashpah, talking about giving, and the same thing applies to every time we do something. So every time we do something, there is the two parts, and there's the part in which no sefer b'tchiloso, and then we have the level which is the seif maisa, which is beyond. Just as it's in the idea when we talk about being mashpia like chesed, al derech zehu b'chol asiyah. Likewise, it's any time we do something. The soifon, what is the end? Hu hasiyah atzma. That's the doing itself. Asiyah upulas ha'odam. When the person does the act of the person, v'nikraz b'shem soifon, that's called the end. Why is that always the end, the doing? First of all, and this is the very last, that's why it's the end. And also the act of doing comes at the end, that's why it's called Sefer. Because within that, the B'tchila hu ha'tainuk. It starts off, what he does at the end, starts off with a level of delight. And from that come the will, the seichel, the midas to want to do that. V'hamidos later on get dressed up in the garments, v'slapshim b'machshava v'dibur. Ul'achri zebo ha'mais, and then comes the mais. Comes after first tainuk, then everything goes through to the mais. And what do we say? No, it's seifon b'tchiloson b'seifon. And the end, the Maisa, is stuck into the beginning and the beginning of the end, which means the Shoresh HaMaisa hu b'hatainug, that the root of the Maisa is in the level of the Tainug, which started all this. Shehu HaTechila, that is the beginning. So it's notes Tchilason b'seifon, that it's the seifon is the root of what he is doing because he had that delight. Just like we said before about having the hashpah to give the compassion. Sibas harotzin shar hakoiches. That's the reason for the rotzin and the other koiches is because of the maisa. And the same thing is on the other way. V'chein notes tchiloson b'soifon, that the notes the tchila b'soifon shegilu hatainug hu ba'maisa davka. That's in the maisa. So that's the first level of notes tchiloson b'soifon b'tchiloson. What is the soif maisa hu? Soif maisa. What is soif maisa? That's not talking about the last action. Loi ha'asiya atzma. We're not talking about the doing itself. El ha'maisa shenaseso al yidei asiyas upulos odom. That is what has been accomplished, the act that has been accomplished through the doing and the act of the person, what came out of it. So that's the soif maisa, not the act itself, but the results. The iker inyan soif maisa, hu b'ha'maisa habo al yidei asiyos. The main thing of the soif maisa is the act what comes through his doing. That doesn't hinge on the person's wish, the way he wants to. Say, like a craftsman who does work, the craftsman cannot accept upon himself that the work will be successful. He can accept that he's going to do it, but it's going to be successful. The inyan that does not hinge on the craftsman. Similar to where we said before, when the poor person received hashpah, that's not up to the giver, that's up to the poor person. That hinges on the recipient, not the one that gives. So the end of that maise is connected to the machshava tchila. The delight of the craftsman for the fact that the world was done. He put in what he could, all that he can. Then there's the results, that the work was done in complete perfection and beauty, both for that slach in a successful way. That reaches into a greater delight, more than the delight of doing the work. The notes that is connected to the tainug is not as great as the tainug which comes from the soif maisa b'machshava techila. The tainug shenases hamalocha, the tainug that the work that is being done, the asiyas hamalocha, hu tainug hamurkav. It's a delight which is put together. It's a murkav. It's combined from the tainug masiyas hamalocha. It's combined the pleasure from doing malacha. But when he sees that the work was done with perfection and beauty, then is revealed the simple tainug, not a murk of tainug, as explained in that above hemshech and the hemshech from Ayin base. So what the Rebbe brings down, these two ideas that we talked, first he gave the example, mashpos hachesed, but the Rebbe brings this down. The same thing applies in all kinds of doing, but there's a difference. The normal, when we say no tzeifa, the act of doing, that reaches the level of tainug. But when we talk about soif maisa, that is the end, the result, that is machshava tchila, that comes to a level which is even higher than the chatchila thought, and therefore the tainug over there is a greater tainug than the tainug hamurkav.